Welcome, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. We had to fix a few things. Andrea's going to be talking about security testing without an army of ninjas, which is kind of awesome because one of the things I've seen that we fail at a lot in, well, not in just security, but also just as developers, is actually testing our stuff appropriately, and they're doing a great job with that. So with that, please welcome Andrea.
All right, thank you. Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be here, and you're all here too. So yeah, I'm going to be talking, the topic is security testing without an army of ninjas, and just to let you know, I work for the EMC Product Security Office, and what I'll be talking about are our recent advances in the approach we take to security testing. And the reason I'm here and why we thought it was important to talk about this is that we want to give visibility to everybody in the industry of what some of our practices are, because we're making efforts to improve security test practices, and we think it will be beneficial. And we also want to create more cross-community collaboration in this space. One thing I want to make sure I do before I go any further is acknowledge a former colleague of mine, Aaron Katz. Aaron, do you want to raise your hand, just so people know he's there? Aaron did a lot of the heavy lifting for this work. He's since moved on to another career opportunity, and we'll be building on the foundation that he created, and I'll be presenting here. And like I said, what was said earlier, please hold your questions till the end. I want to be sure to get through all the slides, and I'll allow time for discussion. So what do we do at the EMC Product Security Office? Just to give you a little background for the work, we develop policies and standards and technical guidance for enablement and governance for our product teams, and that would include tools and resources so that they can build high security assurance into the products that we ship to our customers. A big part of that is the Security Development Lifecycle, or SDL, which is a repeatable and measurable process by which our product teams can integrate secure best practices into every phase of the software development lifecycle. A very key part of this is security testing, and actually it's a key part that, as Rob was saying, in some ways is often neglected. So I'm going to be talking about that. But just to set the stage for the landscape in which we work, EMC has over 10,000 engineers building hundreds of products. And the products will cover a disparate range of technology. So, everything from firmware to hardware that has built just traditional storage products like people might be familiar with for EMC, software-based systems, cloud-based services, on to what we call third platform products, which is basically platforms that allow anyone from anywhere to perform what they need to perform from any device. So it creates a lot of challenges for our little product security office and all these teams. Meanwhile, our product portfolio continues to grow through acquisitions and technology innovations. All that said, we think that we're not too atypical for the industry. So when I said more than 10,000 engineers, you might have seen the little sub-bullet that said about 4,000 quality engineers. That is a veritable army of quality engineers. So, this summarizes what we're offering to them. I'm going to cover how we got to that and more details on that. But this covers basically what we're offering all of those quality engineers, which is basically a centralized repository of test cases and a test plan that they can take and bake right into their existing quality engineering processes without having to be security experts. Now, I'm taking a step back here. So why am I doing this? What I want to do is just say, from a 30,000 foot level, what is the problem, just across the board? If we look at all the breaches and all the tweets and the things that come across on the mailing list in terms of the number of vulnerabilities reported and exploits and breaches and so forth, and the impact that has not just on EMC but all kinds of all companies, it's pretty evident that despite all of the good work that we security professionals are doing in building security into our products in the form of good security coding practices and threat modeling and all of our scanning for compliance and hiring pen testers and all of that, there's still a problem. And part of that problem, we think, is the need for the baking in of security testing into quality engineering processes, just like other non-functional requirements such as reliability and availability. But despite all that, I think what often happens is that the knee-jerk reaction to all the risk and the business impact and everything is that sometimes the temptation is to say, why don't we just hire a ton of security experts and throw them at our project? Well, the problem is there really aren't a ton of security experts out there. And even of the approximately 4,000 quality engineers we have, only a handful are security experts. So that's not a realistic goal. We can't just say, let's just throw a bunch of security experts at the problem. So then we could say, okay, well, why don't we just make quality engineers become security experts? After all, we do automated scanning for compliance purposes, using things like Synzic Hailstorm and Nessus vulnerability scanners and so forth. So why don't we just make our quality engineers build that into their quality engineering processes regardless of compliance checking? The problem with that is that the scanners don't always work for all the technologies that we need to support. It's no silver. It still requires some security expertise in that the quality engineer still needs to know how to configure the scanner to get the best penetration. The results tend to be fairly shallow across the product, and even the results that are there, there's some expertise required in order for somebody to be able to triage them and fix the problems. So then we say, well, okay, we get shallow there, let's go deep with pen testing. We'll make our quality engineers do pen testing, or we'll hire them out. Again, quality engineers end up having to have a lot more expertise just to be able to target the scope of the pen test and to handle the reports that come in. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. Better? All right. That's good because we're getting to the good part of the presentation. So, okay. So then we could say, okay, in terms of add security, okay, let's just train them. We'll just train our quality engineers. So now what the idea that sometimes we see is we'll just make our quality engineers security experts by training them. Well, the problem with that is that quality engineers have their own processes, their own jargon. They have full-time jobs already. And overloading them with a whole bunch of new training for these folks who are really quality engineering professionals that may not really want to become security experts, nor is it necessarily appropriate, isn't realistic. So the common result of all this is that we end up often with what limited training we do, and I also want to say, before I forget, that training has to be backed up by experience. Just like all of these, scanning and pen testing, everything requires experience. So it's not just a matter of making somebody in theory an expert, they have to have experience to back it up. Without that, we end up with what is here called, and I agree, inexpert experts. Basically, it's like a veneer of application security within the quality engineering department. And the veneer gives the illusion that we have security testing happening when maybe it's really not. So really, to be realistic, we have to say an army of security ninjas just cannot be required. It's just not going to happen. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative, and this may seem obvious, but in some ways it's not, is let's make our security experts think like quality engineers. And let's bake security right into the QE processes. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, if these steps that I'm showing here, the 5 steps on the screen, are very typical of a quality engineering function, basically like a procedure that one might follow for doing reliability testing or doing functional testing, etc. Here, it's been modified with security in mind. So step 1 would be, choose a vulnerability that we want to target for testing. Now, this is where a security expert, like one from the Product Security Office, may be able to provide input on which of the vulnerabilities do we think are important to target. Basically vulnerabilities that are in the CWE, but ones that are also actually of interest to attackers out in the wild, such as things in the SANS Top 25, the OWASP Top 10, the things that we have on our own internal Product Security Response Center list, etc. Then this next step is that we want to write test cases for actual root causes, and I'll go into that in a second. The test plans themselves are things that the quality engineer writes, but what we want to do is provide a test plan to the quality engineers that they can just pick up and use without having to have the necessary expertise. Also, we design a test case framework for them, and it's a framework that other folks can leverage to add more test cases, and the test cases can be picked off by quality engineers from our internal test case repository, which we lovingly call our security test library. And then we also write these test cases. So that's a procedure. So let's just start with an example. So one example, and this is really a weakness but that I'm showing as an example, but cross-site scripting. This is one that we at EMC find to be high on the list, and I think other folks do too. So I'm just using as an example here, high on the list of targeted vulnerabilities, things that get reported a lot. So now I want to distinguish between, when we say identify root cause, I want to distinguish between root cause and weakness. So CWE is an enumeration that, it does go in and it talks about the weaknesses and what can be done to avoid the weaknesses in the product, such as with cross-site scripting, it would be helpful if there was HTML encoding of output from a JavaScript before it goes out to the screen. That would be a way to prevent problems with cross-site scripting. But that doesn't get to the root cause of flaws in software development that created the opening, the fact that, well, maybe there was HTML encoding, but it wasn't done properly. Never mind that it wasn't done there at all. What we care about with the quality engineering side of this, we're assuming that we've already addressed secure coding, and right now what we're doing is we're validating that there isn't a flaw in our prevention mechanisms. So just as an example, like again, HTML encoding, we say, well, it must exist. So the question is, from a testing perspective, is the HTML encoder correctly encoding the output? And it's not just a question of is it encoding it properly from the JavaScript, but is it encoding it properly at every output that could go out to the screen? As you can see here, that could come from different places. So the UI layer or the UI framework, we want to make sure that the encoding is actually happening where it needs to happen at every layer before it goes out. And this is something quality engineering can help with. It's also something that scanners can't help with. So when we say write a test plan, what we want to do here, one of the very important things is to list the test cases. And what I'm showing here is what we have. So what we've built that I think is the most useful at the moment for our teams is we've built a strong foundation and a framework that they can build from. So part of that framework, it looks rather prescriptive on the screen, but the intention of it is that a quality engineer with no security expertise has an idea of what each test case, what the applicability is, an ID so that they can use it in their reporting, like their bug reporting, and what some of the dependencies are. So we're kind of making it a no-brainer as much as possible from the security side. This is just a snapshot from our wiki. So basically we do everything. We currently provide a lot of our resources and our knowledge base to our product teams through our own Product Security Office wiki. And this is a sample of a piece of a test plan that we already make available to our quality engineering team. So then we say, let's design the test cases. Now this is a little bit tricky. The hard thing, I think the plan is great. They can just take our plan and use it. And we have different levels of plans. We have, level 0, which is just scanners for those who just want a shallow look. There's level 1, which is what we call integrated, which goes into more depth as far as how to do testing manually, maybe using automated scripts. We have level 3 that might get into more tools like using fuzzing and so forth. But so we can write plans for each of those levels, and the one I just showed was for integrated. But the question is, for each of those levels, we need to design the test cases themselves. And one thing, with those, when we design those, is first we want to choose which ones to write. And the other thing is that there are different types of testing that need to be done. And ideally, for example, unit tests. We could have unit tests that can validate whether HTML encoding is being done properly by a developer in a given HTML encoding method. We can do that. But that doesn't answer the question of, is it happening at every layer, such as an integration test could reveal. So the different types of tests that we can write test cases for our quality engineers to incorporate in their plans. We also want to make sure there's positive and negative testing. And as much as possible, there can sometimes be some detailed procedures, but those procedures can be automated. Again, though, I want to reiterate, one of the challenges with this is to not overkill. So there's the do nothing versus the do too much. Like, where do you stop in terms of writing test cases? Because our goal is to get this out there, make it consumable and achievable by our quality engineering teams with as minimal expertise required as possible. So that means that we need to target those weaknesses and slash what I'll call vulnerabilities that are most prevalent in the industry and most reported by our own customers. So that is what I'm pointing out here, is that although we could have many tests per CWE, what we really want to target are the things that are on the OWASP top 10, the SANS top 25, our own company's or your company's top 10. And then when writing the test cases, again, this is not meant to be prescriptive as much as a framework. It's like a specification so that it's consistent from one test case to another test case. A lot of the work is actually repeated. A lot of the same tools are used for a whole web app vulnerability testing vector, for example. And then we provide a test procedure. So here's an example of a unit test for HTML encoding. And I'm just showing on the right, you can see, because a lot of quality engineering, they're limited in resources. So giving them an idea of, how easy is it, how hard, how much effort is it going to be in terms of time that it's going to take, etc., is very helpful to them. We also would like to provide the procedures and what we would call completion. When do you know you're done? So this is just a snippet again of a test case that we have on our wiki for HTML encoding. So what are the next steps for us? First of all, we're going to build on the foundation that we've already laid in 2014. So we already delivered STL 1.1 that has test cases, like I say, a centralized test plan and a repository that quality engineers can use. We've already reached out to our quality engineering community, and we've got some contributors from the handful of security experts that are in that community. We're having them contribute test cases. So we're actually building a cross-geo community that will contribute to our repository of test cases. The other thing that we're going to be doing is measuring our success. So a key aspect of the work we do isn't just to do security test approach and methodology and so forth for the sake of for just the sake of it. We do it because we want to see that there's measurable success out there. So what we'll be doing is we're going to be measuring how much this test library gets adopted by our product teams, how effective that they find it in terms of reducing the number of findings that are reported, and how efficient and how scalable. So we are constantly, I don't want to go so far as to say it's agile, but we're in constant dialogue with our product teams to find out how effective the resources that we're providing to them are, and we'll be doing that in this coming year. Meanwhile, we're going to be expanding our repository of test cases. So we'll be leveraging the internal resources like I described, but we'll also be partnering with some of our partners that are part of SafeCode, and we'll be relying on open software security projects like the OWASP testing project. Wherever we can leverage existing test cases, we want to do that. And really, that's also part of presenting here again, is to get some cross-community collaboration. And with that, any questions? Anybody want to, any comments or questions? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, could you raise your hands a little higher? Really tough to see. There we go.
So you mentioned that QEs don't really have an interest in becoming security experts, or by and large, it's obviously an individual thing. What makes security experts want to write test cases?
Well, that's a really good question. So how do you encourage or motivate security experts to write test cases? My feeling about that is that there is a collection of security experts in the AppSec space that are extremely passionate about improving the quality and frustrated by the findings that come out that could have been avoided just by good development practices. So it's targeting people who are really passionate about the end-to-end security. It's not as interesting as a lot of aspects of security, of being a security expert. It's, but within a product development organization where there are security experts, those folks who are already passionate about that those are the ones that we can work with to build that are expressing interest in developing test cases. Does that? Yeah. It's not a huge population of people. Definitely not a huge population of people. And that's why we have this framework, because if we can have a standardized way to input these, then we might be able to go outside our own internal resources to have a more scalable get more people out there who might be willing to write the test cases as well.
Is this working? I guess it is. This is a little bit unfair, but I just want to throw this out at you. How would your process deal with finding a vulnerability like the latest Heartbleed vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And to be honest with you, I was asked, we were having a conversation, myself and a couple of colleagues last night, about that precise topic, because we have with RSA as part of our organization, and we have crypto experts, and we are going to be building out a crypto test suite, which was next on our list. I was asking that same question. So I bet I get this, I thought I might get this question actually, and I was asking the same question. Well, if we had that crypto test suite with all the cases in it, in our library, would it have found the issue? And honestly, I'm not sure it would have in that case. That said, and I think that there was agreement from us that it probably would not have. It wasn't, it's a flaw that was a software development flaw that is detectable. But I don't think in the context of crypto test cases that would have been something that we would have put in there. That said, it will go in there, right? And I think that may be the case with this in general, is that we are going to be tackling flaws that we know about. And we're not always, for example, HTML encoding of output, I'm not sure that was always known to be a potential flaw that could cause a cross-site scripting issue. These are things that we have to be able to continually improve upon. So that's a great question.
What steps do you take to get the developers involved in this process where you have sort of a baked-in approach to security testing, and also how are they involved in things like unit testing, development of test plans, and so forth?
Yeah, another great question about, just in case people didn't hear it, how do we get our developers involved in the baking in of security into things like unit tests and the other types of testing? So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the process we have, because I will say this, that honestly spoken, I don't think a lot of product teams really build security unit tests into their automated builds. And this is something that we're hoping they will start doing, because these are the kinds of test cases that we're providing. These are the kind of things developers can put in. What we have in our process, and what we call the SDL, we encourage product teams, and when we engage with them, we ask them to provide security champions for the products that represent the different organizations. So we have a development security champion and a quality security champion and a vulnerability response security champion. They work together, and actually they meet and talk. And then we have security champion forums where they can collaborate. Yeah, a lot of times it's because so many people are across geo, but we do share information across the product teams. So this is, at the moment, I would say that there isn't anything in our standard that says you will put these in your unit tests, developers. We instead have a lot of really good guidance on security coding best practices, security coding scanning using things like, or static analysis using things like 4-5, error code, etc. But this is the next thing we need to do is we need to bring these unit tests into the continuous integration environment for our developers. So they are all the developer champions are part of all the conversation we're having around the security test library. I think it's a great question, though. I thank you. Okay, no more questions or comments, suggestions? No? Okay.